Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The tension inside the halls of Forrester Creations was beginning to feel heavier than ever, like a storm waiting for the perfect moment to finally break loose. In the middle of all that growing frustration stood Hope Logan Spencer, emotionally exhausted and increasingly disillusioned with the company she had once fought so hard to believe in. At Brooke Logan Forrester's house, the atmosphere carried a quiet sadness as Hope poured out everything she had been holding inside for far too long. Her voice was filled with disappointment as she spoke about the endless delays surrounding her fashion line and the constant feeling that she was being sidelined, dismissed, and treated as though her contributions no longer mattered. Every frustration she had buried over the years now seemed to rise to the surface all at once, and Brooke could see the emotional weight her daughter had been carrying. What started as another painful conversation about work slowly transformed into something much deeper, something far more personal, as Hope's resentment toward the power structure at Forrester Creations became impossible to ignore. As the conversation intensified, Hope returned to an idea that had clearly been growing in her mind for some time. She passionately insisted that Brooke should be the one standing beside Ridge as co-CEO instead of Steffy Forrester Finnegan, and this time, her feelings came with even greater conviction. Hope believed Brooke had earned that place through years of loyalty, sacrifice, and dedication, yet somehow she always seemed to be pushed aside whenever the family hierarchy tightened its grip on the company. Brooke listened carefully, visibly moved by her daughter's fierce defense of her, and eventually admitted that she agreed with what Hope was saying. There was pain hidden beneath Brooke's calm expression because deep down, she understood exactly why Hope felt this way. Still, reality weighed heavily on her as she gently explained that there was little she could do to change the situation. Steffy had no intention of surrendering her position, and Ridge would never willingly remove his daughter from power, no matter how complicated things became within the company. But Hope was no longer willing to quietly accept those realities. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that her frustration went far beyond delayed projects or workplace disagreements. She believed the Logans had spent years being undervalued and disrespected at Forrester Creations, always expected to prove themselves while others were automatically protected. Her emotions spilled out with growing intensity as she argued that Brooke needed to stand up for herself and demand the respect she deserved, instead of continuing to tolerate the imbalance. Brooke watched her daughter carefully, and in that moment she began to sense something dangerous shifting beneath the surface. This wasn't simply another emotional outburst from Hope. There was a growing determination in her voice, a restless energy that suggested she might finally be reaching her breaking point. The possibility of a major change suddenly no longer felt distant or impossible. As the evening continued, Hope's anger slowly gave way to honesty, and the truth she had been struggling to admit finally began to emerge. She confessed that she was seriously considering making a dramatic employment change because Ridge and Steffy still refused to give her any real assurances about the future of her line. The uncertainty had become unbearable, and every vague promise only made her feel more disposable. Though Hope stopped short of fully revealing her next move, there was a quiet but unmistakable implication hanging in the air. She was dangerously close to walking away from Forrester Creations altogether. Brooke could feel the gravity of what her daughter was saying, and the thought of Hope severing ties with the company carried enormous emotional weight. For Hope, this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about dignity, self-worth, and finally refusing to remain in a place where she no longer felt valued. Meanwhile, across town, another conversation was unfolding that threatened to shake the Forrester family even further. Carter Walton found himself face-to-face with Steffy and Ridge, and unlike Steffy, he wasn't dismissing the danger surrounding Hope's growing dissatisfaction. Steffy had been openly scoffing at the idea that Hope would ever truly leave the company, convinced that Hope's future at Forrester Creations remained secure no matter how much she complained. But Carter had seen something different. He had witnessed Hope's frustration up close, long before the shocking coup that once shifted the balance of power inside the company. He understood how deeply exhausted she had become after years of feeling manipulated, delayed, and repeatedly pushed aside whenever her ambitions conflicted with the Forrester agenda. Because of that, Carter's tone carried a serious warning as he urged Ridge and Steffy to recognize the consequences of their treatment toward Hope before it was too late. The atmosphere during Carter's warning was thick with tension as he carefully laid out the truth neither Ridge nor Steffy seemed eager to face. Hope was not simply throwing empty threats around in frustration. She was reaching a point where walking away might actually feel like freedom. Carter reminded them that a person could only be pushed so far before they stopped fighting for approval and started fighting for themselves instead. Every delay, every dismissal, and every broken reassurance had slowly chipped away at Hope's loyalty to the company, and now the damage was becoming impossible to reverse. Ridge listened while Steffy remained defensive, but even she could not entirely ignore the seriousness in Carter's voice. There was an ominous sense that the balance inside Forrester Creations was beginning to crack, and if Hope finally decided to leave, the fallout could ripple through the entire Logan and Forrester families in ways no one was prepared for. As the emotional storm continued to build, the future of Forrester Creations suddenly felt more uncertain than ever before. Hope stood at a crossroads between loyalty and liberation, torn between the history she shared with the company and the painful realization that she might never truly be respected there. Brooke could see the heartbreak behind her daughter's anger, while Carter recognized the dangerous consequences that could come from continuing to ignore Hope's pain. And looming over everything was the possibility that a major shift was already beginning, one capable of changing relationships, alliances, and power inside the fashion empire forever. The warnings had been spoken aloud now, impossible to take back, and everyone involved could feel the tension tightening with every passing moment. If Hope Logan Spencer finally reached her limit, the next chapter for the Logans and Forresters could become one of the most explosive turning points yet. The emotional pressure surrounding Hope Logan Spencer continued to intensify, like a fire slowly spreading beneath the polished surface of Forrester Creations, threatening to ignite everything in its path without warning. After the painful conversations at Brooke Logan Forrester's house and Carter Walton's unsettling confrontation with Ridge and Steffy, an uneasy feeling settled over everyone connected to the company. No one could deny that something significant was changing. Hope had spent years trying to remain patient, trying to believe that loyalty and hard work would eventually earn her stability and respect. But now that faith was beginning to crumble before everyone's eyes. Every unanswered question about her line, every delay that left her future hanging in uncertainty, had slowly chipped away at her confidence until frustration became impossible to hide. The once hopeful and optimistic woman who believed in collaboration and family unity was now standing on the edge of a decision that could alter the future of the entire company. At Brooke's home, the conversation between mother and daughter lingered long after the words themselves had faded. The room carried a heavy silence as Brooke reflected on everything Hope had confessed, and beneath her composed exterior, there was growing concern. She could see how deeply wounded Hope had become by years of feeling secondary within the Forrester hierarchy, and it reminded Brooke of battles she herself had fought countless times before. The painful cycle seemed to repeat itself generation after generation, with the Logans constantly forced to defend their place in a world where they were rarely made to feel fully accepted. Brooke's heart ached as she watched Hope struggle between holding on to the career she had built and protecting her own emotional well-being. There was fear in Brooke's eyes now because she understood that once Hope crossed the line from frustration into complete disillusionment, there might be no turning back. And if Hope truly walked away from Forrester Creations, it would not simply be another business decision. It would become a deeply personal rejection of everything the company had represented in her life. Hope herself appeared emotionally torn as the weight of her possible resignation became more real. Part of her still wanted reassurance, some genuine sign that Ridge and Steffy valued her contributions enough to fight for her future within the company. But another part of her had grown tired of waiting for validation that never fully came. She was exhausted from constantly having her future treated like an afterthought, while others held power without question. The uncertainty surrounding her line no longer felt temporary. It felt like a symbol of how little trust and stability she truly had within the company. And although she carefully avoided revealing all of her plans, there was now a growing sense that Hope had begun imagining a future beyond the walls of Forrester Creations. The possibility of stepping away no longer seemed impossible. In fact, for the first time, it almost seemed necessary. Across town, Carter Walton could not shake the concern that lingered after his warning to Ridge and Steffy. He had seen firsthand how emotionally drained Hope had become, and unlike others, he understood that this situation had been building for far longer than anyone realized. Carter remembered the countless moments when Hope had been asked to wait patiently while decisions about her future remained trapped in endless uncertainty. He knew how many times she had swallowed her frustration in order to preserve peace within the company, even when she felt disrespected or ignored. That history was exactly why Carter's warning carried so much weight. He recognized the dangerous tipping point that Ridge and Steffy seemed determined to underestimate. To them, Hope's loyalty may have appeared permanent, but Carter understood that even the most patient person eventually reaches a limit. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, however, remained unwilling to fully acknowledge the threat standing directly in front of her. Her confidence in the company's structure and her belief that Hope would ultimately stay blinded her to the emotional reality unfolding behind the scenes. To Steffy, Hope's frustrations sounded like familiar complaints rather than genuine signs of departure. But beneath Steffy's dismissive attitude, subtle cracks were beginning to form. Carter's words lingered longer than she wanted to admit, planting doubts she could not entirely silence. Deep down, there was a growing awareness that if Hope truly left the company, the consequences would extend far beyond one fashion line. It could deepen the divide between the Forresters and Logans in ways that might never fully heal. And perhaps most dangerously of all, it could create an opportunity for the Logans to build something entirely separate from the Forrester empire. Ridge Forrester found himself caught in the middle of the growing storm, torn between his loyalty to Steffy and the uncomfortable truths Carter had forced him to hear. He understood Hope's value to the company, even if he struggled to openly challenge Steffy's authority. But now the tension was escalating to a point where avoiding conflict might no longer be possible. Ridge could sense that Hope's patience was disappearing, and with it, the fragile stability that had been holding everything together. The idea of Hope resigning carried professional consequences, but it also threatened to reopen emotional wounds within the family that had barely healed over the years. Every relationship connected to the company suddenly felt vulnerable, as though one decision could trigger a chain reaction no one would be able to stop. As the hours passed, the emotional atmosphere surrounding Forrester Creations grew darker and more uncertain, with everyone unknowingly inching closer toward a major turning point. Hope's pain was no longer hidden behind polite smiles or restrained professionalism. It had become impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and impossible to contain forever. Brooke feared the heartbreak that might follow. Carter feared the consequences of continued arrogance, and even Ridge and Steffy were beginning to feel the tension tightening around them. The future now stood balanced on a fragile edge, with Hope Logan Spencer holding the power to change everything through a single decision. And as emotions continued to rise behind closed doors, it became painfully clear that the battle for respect, loyalty, and power inside Forrester Creations was only just beginning. As dawn slowly gave way to another tense day inside the glamorous world of Forrester Creations, the atmosphere surrounding Hope Logan Spencer felt more fragile than ever before. Every hallway, every office, and every quiet glance exchanged between employees seemed charged with the unspoken awareness that something significant was about to happen. Beneath the elegance of couture designs and polished business meetings, emotional fault lines were spreading rapidly through the company's foundation. Hope carried herself with determination, but behind her composed exterior was a woman wrestling with heartbreak, betrayal, and exhaustion. She had spent so much of her life fighting to prove her worth within a family empire that never fully embraced her, and now the emotional cost of that battle was finally becoming unbearable. The uncertainty about her future no longer felt like a temporary obstacle. It felt like a painful message that she was never truly secure there to begin with. At Brooke Logan Forrester's house, the emotional aftermath of Hope's confession still lingered heavily in the air. Brooke could not stop thinking about the sadness in her daughter's eyes when she admitted she was considering leaving the company entirely. It reminded Brooke of her own years of struggling for respect in a world where the Forresters often controlled the narrative, deciding who belonged and who did not. Watching Hope endure the same emotional wounds filled Brooke with both sorrow and quiet anger. She knew her daughter had poured her heart into her work, believing passion and dedication would eventually overcome family politics. Yet once again, the Logans seemed to find themselves standing outside the circle of power. Brooke's maternal instincts were growing stronger with every passing hour, and deep down, she was beginning to wonder whether Hope walking away might actually save her from years of continued pain. But even that possibility carried heartbreak because leaving Forrester Creations would mean letting go of dreams Hope had spent years building. Meanwhile, Hope's inner conflict continued to intensify as she reflected on Carter Walton's support and the complete lack of reassurance from Ridge and Steffy. Carter had become one of the few people who truly understood how deeply frustrated she had become, and his warning to the Forrester leadership only confirmed that her feelings were justified. For so long, Hope had questioned whether she was overreacting, whether her disappointment came from emotion rather than reality. But hearing Carter acknowledge the pattern of neglect and uncertainty made something shift inside her. She began to realize that her growing resentment was not born from impatience. It came from years of being repeatedly asked to accept less, while others protected their own power without compromise. That realization was painful, but it was also strangely freeing, because for the first time, Hope allowed herself to seriously imagine a future where she no longer had to beg for recognition. Inside the executive offices at Forrester Creations, Carter's warning continued to echo in the minds of both Ridge and Steffy, even as they tried to focus on business. Steffy remained outwardly confident, refusing to believe Hope would truly leave, but the certainty in her voice was no longer as solid as before. Carter had forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. They may have underestimated how deeply hurt Hope had become. Every time Steffy dismissed Hope's concerns or delayed clear decisions about her line, she believed she was protecting the company's priorities. But now there was a growing possibility that those decisions had pushed Hope dangerously close to the edge. Ridge, meanwhile, appeared increasingly uneasy. He understood the emotional complexity behind the conflict far more than Steffy realized, and part of him feared that if Hope walked away, the damage within the family would become permanent. He could already sense the emotional divide widening between the Forresters and Logans, and he knew it would not take much for old resentments to explode once again. As the tension mounted, whispers of change began quietly circulating through the company itself. Employees noticed the strain in meetings, the sharp undertones in conversations, and the growing emotional distance between key members of the Forrester family. Hope's uncertain future was no longer just private speculation. It was becoming the center of a storm everyone could feel approaching. Some feared the collapse of important partnerships within the company, while others quietly wondered whether Hope's departure could open the door to an entirely new chapter for the Logans. The idea that Hope might eventually take her talent elsewhere carried enormous implications, especially considering her influence and public recognition within the fashion world. What once seemed impossible now felt frighteningly real, and through it all, Hope found herself standing emotionally alone at the center of the chaos, struggling to decide whether loyalty was still worth the pain it demanded from her. There was heartbreak in the realization that the company she once viewed as family had become a place where she constantly felt uncertain and disposable. Yet there was also a growing spark of strength beginning to rise beneath her sadness. For years, Hope had fought for stability inside a system that rarely fought for her in return. Now she was beginning to question whether true freedom could only come from finally walking away. The emotional battle inside her was becoming impossible to ignore, and every conversation, every dismissal, and every lingering silence only pushed her closer toward a life-changing decision. As another chapter of tension unfolded inside the glamorous but emotionally fractured world of Forrester Creations, one truth became impossible to escape. The company stood dangerously close to a turning point that could reshape its future forever. Hope Logan Spencer was no longer simply asking for respect. She was beginning to demand it, even if that meant leaving behind everything she had once believed in. And as emotions deepened and loyalties were tested, the looming possibility of a dramatic Logan shift threatened to shake the Forrester dynasty to its very core.